everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about season 3 of Bridgerton. So I'm really excited for this video. I've just finished part 2 of season 3 and I've made some notes and I'm going to just run through some thoughts, break everything down and give my perspective both as a therapist and just as a person, a fan of the show, someone who's emotionally invested in the characters. Please stay tuned if you're a fan of Bridgerton because I'm going to be breaking it down and talking about everything. So there's going to be timestamps down below. I'm going to start off talking about Colin, then Penelope, then Colin and Penelope together, and then I'm going to talk about the other storylines and the other characters. So Cressida, Eloise, Kate and Anthony, etc. I'm excited to get into it, but obviously the main event is Colin and Penelope. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I do other TV videos as well. Please follow me on Instagram as well. All the information about me is in the description. Let's get on to it. So I'm going to start off talking about Colin. Even though it's more from Penelope's perspective this season, obviously it's kind of Colin's season in terms of like each Bridgerton has a book. I should say now that I haven't read any of the books, so any context that is missing, please let me know in the comments. I really want this video to be a discussion, a bit like on my Baby Reindeer video and Sex and the City. Loads of people had lots of different thoughts and opinions on those shows and left their thoughts down below, and I'd really love to hear from you as well. But yeah, definitely let me know if I've missed something because I haven't read the books, and let me know if I should read the books as well. So we meet Colin at the start of the season, and I said we meet Colin, obviously we already know Colin, but he's had this glow up, right? And I feel like the glow up is a good place to start because one of the funny things about Bridgerton as a TV show is that the men and the women actually have this like makeover when it's their love story. And we saw that with Anthony in particular, where I mean, he was still a very good looking man in season 1, but then in season 2, for his own season, I think he had a haircut, it's different styling, perhaps more in shape, maybe a bit of a tan, got rid of his sideburns. It was definitely what is considered a glow up. And Colin definitely had the same. They make a point of showing him with his top off, I think, in the first episode. And he's also got new hair, new styling, and just how he kind of walks and presents himself seems quite different. So we meet this kind of new Colin, and of course from Penelope's perspective as well, he seems different. Not necessarily in a good way though, because obviously where we left off in season 2, she got like essentially rejected by him because he made those comments to people at the end of the season about how he would never court her. So he's back, and yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? Like I was a bit like, I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about this new Colin. He seemed a bit arrogant, a bit up himself. You find out later on that he basically teaches himself on his travels charm, and that's how he leads to teaching Penelope. So it's like in order to get by, probably because he was quite lonely, he's growing up, he's getting older, he is having more experiences and probably required new confidence. And so with that, he kind of learned how to be, particularly with women, I got the impression, kind of more sexually experienced and more confident. Probably with that, decided to change his appearance as well. I think that's the context basically, is that Colin's basically gone through a bit of a journey, quite literally, whilst he's been away, with his like self-esteem, confidence, charm. It sounds like a little bit of a lonely existence really, which is why he like misses getting letters from Penelope, family, like he's sort of out there on his own, not really hearing from anyone. So he's come back and all the ladies love him. He's kind of like the hot catch of the season. He doesn't seem super comfortable in it really. I sort of didn't buy that it was just him being himself. He kind of like enjoyed the attention, but I don't know, something felt very insincere about the whole thing. I don't know if anyone else got that sense, but I was a bit like, who is this? Like, I don't know, just not Colin. It just didn't seem himself. But I mean, good for him for feeling good about himself and getting attention and getting like validation. Sometimes we all need that in life. So we learn a few things about Colin this season that I think is quite interesting. I think one of them is that Lady Bridgerton, as in not Kate, the mum, mentions at one point that he's like always been the most sensitive out of her children, and I think that's really interesting. Again, it kind of spoke to me that the bravado that he was coming back with, I mean, I don't want it to sound like he was really over the top because he wasn't, but the sort of almost coldness and strength that he came back with rather than the emotional sensitive side. That's probably one of the reasons why I was like, this seems really out of character. Her saying that he's the most sensitive of her children sort of didn't really surprise me, but it was quite interesting to have that explicitly said. And he is quite in touch with his emotions compared to his brothers, apart from the like youngest one, because obviously he's just a kid. But Anthony and Benedict don't really seem as, they're obviously like lovely people, and definitely it's not like they're not sensitive, but Colin definitely seems to be a bit different from them in that he feels everything really strongly. He's never, had to be the tough one, which leads on to my next point, which is third child syndrome is something that came to mind as I was watching. So he's the third son. So Anthony, we saw in his season, he's a lot of pressure to be the leader, be the head of the household, be the man of the household. Then you have Benedict, who's more of like a creative. He's trying to find himself. He's exploring obviously we'll get to his whole storyline. His personality is more of like, well, I'm not in that role. So there's more freedom. I get to kind of be a bit more free because I'm not the head of the household, and you can really see that. And then it's Colin, and with third children, they tend to be a little bit, I don't want to say forgotten about, because obviously, and there's a lot of Bridgertons actually, so he's not even exactly in the middle. I think he's sort of around the middle. Yeah, they're not the ones that get all the attention because they're not the babies of the family and they're not the oldest. That's quite stereotypical, but I do think it's based in reality often. Colin seems to be the child that gets on with it. He's quite sensitive and he feels everything, but he sort of is finding his way and he's trying to deal with it the best he can, which is probably why he does a lot of traveling actually, because he sort of doesn't know his place really in the family. He's like the younger brother, but he's also the older sibling. If you think of Eloise, like you can tell Eloise looks up to him. He's obviously got his brothers that he looks up to. So it's an odd role to fit, being the like middle child. So basically, in summary, with Colin, he's having a bit of an identity crisis. That's quite extreme way of phrasing it, but he sort of doesn't know who he is and he thinks he's found himself. He's like discovered himself in his travels and he's back, and perhaps he's ready to meet someone, but maybe not. And he sort of really doesn't know who he is still or what he's actually doing. And he's not really being himself. Speaking of identity, let's move on and talk about Penelope, who also goes on her own personal journey, obviously, as well as the relationship that she has with Colin. So I'm going to talk about her as an individual first. So again, we meet Penelope. She's in a bit of a crisis at the start of the season. Obviously, she's still very hurt by what happened with Colin before he went away. She's fallen out with Eloise, so she's really isolated because she's not got that close relationship with her family. That's one of the reasons. I think the main question is, why does Penelope suddenly want to find a match and get married? And the reason really is to escape the household. So it's not really about love, it's not really about security, but as a woman in that time, I know it's all fiction and it's kind of it's a very modern version of that time, obviously, but in that time, in that era, women, obviously, they were just expected to get married and have children, and it was the main way that somebody would leave their family household. Hence why in weddings, the dad walks you down the aisle and stuff. It's property. It's very unromantic, but it's property going from one household to another as part of an agreement. That's kind of not to ruin everyone's dreams of their dad walking them down the aisle, but that is what it's rooted in. So Penelope, actually, interestingly, it's not really about finding connection. It's about leaving the household and escaping because she can't cope with it anymore. The sisters are, got their own situation and they're newly married and they have nothing in common. She doesn't really have anything in common with the sisters, and the mum's kind of preoccupied with all the financial issues and the legal issues and having an heir and getting the other daughters pregnant. And there is this sense that Penelope's just been completely written off. The idea of Penelope ever kind of doing anything is not on anyone's radar. There's nothing about career prospects with her. There's nothing about marriage prospects. And even the mum at one point says, "Oh, I'm so glad that I'll always have you with me." And it's a bit Well, you don't know that. She obviously, I think that's quite interesting in itself, that she kind of expected Penelope to always be with her, and their relationship is really interesting as the season like went on. But yeah, essentially there's no expectations of Penelope. She's the wallflower. She's the person who nobody really sees, nobody really expects anything from. And the main person that did see her actually was Eloise and also Colin. Colin not so much, just because he was seeing her, but not seeing her. Whereas Eloise, it was more of that like mutual, we're really close, we really respect each other, we have a lot in common, they both love reading, stuff like that. Colin definitely saw her and she was a really good friend to him, but it was kind of through that lens of like, unintentionally, I think Colin saw Penelope at the beginning more through what he was gaining from it, which is friendship and support and someone to talk to and someone that he actually does have a lot in common. So, but he wasn't really seeing her for who she actually is as a person, really. Very unintentionally. I don't think there was any malice with that, but his eyes weren't fully open on Penelope. So I really felt for her at the start of the season because she's just really on her own. She also has her own like glow up when she looks absolutely stunning, and that's something else that I want to talk about, which is representation of people of different sizes, people that look different, and I think it's been amazing for that. I think Penelope looked gorgeous. They obviously did the very over-the-top Bridgerton makeover with like her hair suddenly was like not those ringlets anymore, but like the perfect shade of red and the perfect, like, I don't know, just like it looked very soft and wavy. And obviously I loved when she was like no more bright yellows and just bright colours, like she wanted to pick her own colours, and the dresses were so gorgeous, but she was still the same like figure. I'm really glad that they didn't, and not that they would ever do this, I don't think, but there was no like losing weight. I don't know, like that wasn't part of the glow up, because I mean, you could argue with Colin it was a little bit problematic in that men are expected, you see this with Marvel and I think recently like Jurassic Park and stuff, men are expected to get like quite ripped as part of this new role, and it seemed like Colin definitely had that expectation, as in the actor definitely had that expectation put on him to get in better shape. But I'm really glad, I feel like Penelope's body type was exactly the same as it should be, and that was really good representation. I know lots of people saw themselves in Penelope and really liked the kind of romantic and sexual representation with people of a certain body type, a plus size body type. So definitely wanted to comment on that, because that was like such a core part of the show, and I imagine it's caused some discourse. I haven't seen it yet, maybe I've just been lucky to avoid it, but I did notice that, I'm veering slightly off track, but I did notice that a lot of people weren't like loving this season or the idea of this season because of not finding them particularly attractive, which is quite horrifying really. But maybe coming off the back of like Kate and Anthony's season and people finding like Jonathan Bailey really attractive, and obviously she's really beautiful as well, and comparing to them, and I don't know really, because again I've not really seen the discourse, I've just kind of heard about it around like not really into Colin and Penelope, it's just not quite the same, it's just not as hot and steamy, and we're going to get to their hot and steaminess later on, but I would definitely dispute that. I don't really agree that, I mean, A, I think they're both really attractive, and B, it's not really about you fancying the characters anyway. Like, great if you do, great if you don't. It's about like the story and the plot. Fair enough, people might just prefer to kind of fancy the like character, but yeah, I felt like a lot of the criticism of this season was rooted in people's own preferences, which I'm not entirely sure about. Okay, just had to pause it because I'm worried about losing the natural light, so I've put the main lights on. Hopefully that's okay. So yeah, I was talking about kind of stuff around body image and looks and stuff like that with this season, and something else that I was reflecting on is like beauty standards in general. Although obviously maybe season 3 is getting criticism, or like trolls are just being a bit mean around Colin and Penelope, but actually kind of ironically the beauty standards now are very different to what they were historically, and somebody with the like figure of Penelope was, I imagine, considered like absolutely fine, or like actually very attractive, really beautiful. And again, that's not me saying that she's not considered that now, obviously. I'm literally literally just talking about beauty standards of society. And I reckon that I saw a few people say actually that what was considered beautiful of a certain time was, you know, curves, people with a fuller figure, people that were bigger, basically. Beauty standards have changed. I mean, they're always changing, and the expectations of women are always changing for sure, and of men as well. Obviously, I'm probably a bit more kind of inclined to think about the beauty standards of women. A key question that was kind of part of the first part of the season was, can charm be taught? Obviously, Colin felt like he taught himself how to be charming, and that was part of his new persona, so to speak. And from that, he offered to teach Penelope charm. So I just thought that was an interesting question to reflect on. A lot of people aspire to be more kind of socially confident, more able to flirt. There's phrases like game and banter and stuff like that, which introverted people or people, you know, that have social anxiety or just lack confidence, have low self-esteem, can sometimes really struggle with this idea of like going up to somebody and being really charming and attractive and, you know, like able to charm somebody into being interested in them. That was a real interesting part of the beginning of the show for me. I think you can sort of fake it till you make it, basically. And I do believe that's kind of what Colin was doing. It's not to say that he was actually being fake, because he is very charming actually, but I reckon when he was on his travels on his own and he's, you know, gaining his experience and meeting women and feeling quite lonely and all of that and not being in touch with people back home and missing people, that he sort of did embody perhaps his older brothers or something, you know, people that he looks up to or other men that he saw, and kind of exaggerated that part of his personality. So in that sense, I totally get it. And it's not like you're being fake, as I said, or it's not like you're not charming. It just means you're really leaning into an element of yourself and kind of hoping that it works, and then it gets reinforced if it's positively like received. So obviously if he did end up sleeping with women, or women sort of are like getting all giggly around him, then it really validates that it's working, and then so it continues. I totally understand why he was like, well, I've managed to do it. Almost admitting to Penelope that, you know, he didn't have that naturally. He was something that he had to really work on, and that he wanted to be able to give that to Pen as well and teach it. The tricky thing is he was teaching it from a kind of male perspective, and Penelope probably would have benefited from like a girl's perspective as well. It's not to say that men and women can't be friends or can't help each other, obviously, but it was he definitely went into it with like, just, you know, batter your eyelashes and fan and stuff. And, you know, back then maybe that's all it took, but obviously Penelope is charming because of her personality, because she's very smart. And charm really fundamentally is about being yourself, about leaning into the qualities of yourself that you like, because that confidence then radiates out, and that is part of being charming. So even if deep down you're feeling a bit anxious about something or not so confident, when we kind of tap into those parts of ourselves that we actually do quite like, and we express that to others, or we take a real interest in other people or laugh at their jokes. Some people are really good at that. When we talk about people who are naturally charming, they're the people that are really good at like mirroring and looking at somebody and being like, oh, that person really has a great sense of humor, and so then like making jokes or making sure that they're like laughing at somebody that values intelligence, kind of telling interesting stories and telling interesting facts. And that makes it sound a bit more manipulative than I mean, but some people are just very good at seeing what someone is like and kind of not being the complete opposite, or just leaning into it and making that conversation like easier for both people. And that's why it's charm. It's because people are like, oh, this person's great to talk to. And then they're able to do that with multiple people. So multiple people are like, oh, this person's great to talk to, or this person makes me feel really good. Charming people are usually very complimentary as well. And we see that with Colin, that he's kind of complimenting all the women. So he's trying to instill that in Penelope. And bless Penelope, who is very charming, as I said, as herself, is trying to do it his way, or I guess what she's probably seen in other women as well. So she is trying to flirt in that very, very basic way of just fluttering her eyelashes and being like, oh, the weather and so hot and all of this, and it's so unnatural that it's not charming. You could argue that it was very endearing. You know, I thought the reaction was a little bit too like, oh, are you okay? And, you know, I get that they were a bit like weirded out, but, you know, endearing, charming, they're not miles apart, and you could definitely argue that she was being very endearing with her efforts, but charming and flirtatious, it wasn't really landing. So yeah, to answer the question, I think charm can be taught 100%. I think certainly from yourself, you can work on your own kind of charms and work on your own confidence and your own sort of social abilities. And I guess you can absolutely support somebody to be more charming as well, but very much in that way of like encouraging them to be themselves and put themselves out there and lean into the things that they like about themselves. And you know, if they have to kind of fake it a little bit, fake it till you make it, what a lot of people who aren't so confident do sometimes in social situations. So yeah, I just thought that was quite an interesting part of Penelope's storyline. And of course, identity and her being herself is the thread across the whole show. She is a wallflower. She isn't the center of attention. No one really sees her at all. Like, her family don't see her. They don't take it. She's just the girl that reads in her bedroom. You know, Eloise does see her, but then obviously they've fallen out. But she's actually one person that does come to mind in terms of like, they have a lot in common. Penelope's herself around Eloise in terms of her humor and talking about books and showing her intelligence as well and her quick wit. Colin does see her, but I would argue in previous seasons kind of on his terms. And what I mean by that is not that he doesn't see her, but he sees her as a very good friend. He sees her as a constant. He sees her as someone that he could go up to if he's like, who do I talk to? Or he wants a respite from the kind of chaos of society. You know, it's not particularly fair to Penelope, but it's also not intentional. You know, it's not that he doesn't value her at all. Of course he does. He cares about her greatly, actually. He just doesn't really realise. But seeing her, I wouldn't say he quite does until this season, and even then not straight away. Obviously it kind of slowly progresses. So yeah, Penelope's not used to being seen, and obviously the way that she gets notice and gets power is through the column, is through being Lady Whistledown. Now I have to say something about her being Lady Whistledown that's more about a comment on the show. It's like, I thought she made it so obvious that it was her. There was that moment where I think it was before they have their first kiss, where she is like, you know, I think Lady Whistledown had written obviously negative things about her, and Colin was like, you know, I can't believe it, it's so awful. And then she literally says like, well, she had to do that, like otherwise it would be suspicious. And I was like, aren't you just giving it away that it's you? I was just a bit confused by that. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there was a few times as well that she would like run off or look really panicked and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, you're making it so obvious. I don't know how people didn't recognize that it was her. They kind of did, obviously, at the end. Yeah, there was so many moments throughout the season where I was like, she's making it so obvious that it's her. But anyway, the dynamic between her and Lady Whistledown and the identity issues that Penelope has is really interesting this season. So obviously by the end we kind of realise that Penelope and Lady Whistledown are the same person. We kind of obviously know that in a literal sense of like, it is her writing the columns, but in terms of like personalities and identity, that's kind of the main place that we land on by the end. Whereas I think throughout the season, Penelope's not really sure who she is. And because she's been so invisible and not seen or heard and doesn't really know her place in society, except through the column and through being Lady Whistledown and her writing, what's really interesting is to see her absolute terror every time somebody asks her to stop. Like the fact that she even like was willing to sacrifice her love for Colin, her relationship with Colin, her friendship obviously with Eloise, relationship with her family, which I know isn't particularly great like anyway, but still like she risks a lot to maintain the power and to maintain her voice, and that's how important it is. And that really struck me, because there was moments where you'd think, you know, just give it up, like, you know, is it that hard to give it up? But actually for her it is literally her whole voice, it's her whole purpose as well. She doesn't have a role in the household. Obviously there was a time where she didn't think that she would get married. She doesn't have a lot of connection in her life. It gave her a way to express herself, it gave her influence, it gave her probably a sense of self, a sense of like power, control of something, because women in that era didn't have a lot of control of their outcomes. You know, there was just sort of no prospects really. So yeah, that was really interesting to see that she found it so hard to let go of. Like, she could not let go of her writing. I'm not saying she should have to, but it was interesting to me that the thought of it was so scary to her. Another question I had as well was why, and it was Cressida that kind of inspired this for me, but I spoke about her reasons for like marriage and why and all of that. Obviously Cressida is she has loads in common with Penelope actually. She's quite trapped in her household, doesn't have a lot of support from family, no like marriage prospects, things like this. And so that's what inspires Cressida to think more financially and like, right, I'll get the reward and then I will escape or just try and build a life of my own. And it did get me thinking, why didn't Penelope ever do that with the money that she'd earn? I guess maybe it would have been like a bit of a scandal, like if she ran away with all that money, people would have questioned perhaps where she got that money from. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but it was just a thought that I had around like, it's interesting that she chose the marriage route of like, I need to get out of this household, so I need to find a husband, when she actually did have options. She did have options financially at least. Perhaps not a physical place to go, to be fair. So perhaps that's what would hold her back. But yeah, it was just a thought that I had. So obviously let me know what you think about that. And then finally before I move on to talking about Colin and Penelope's actual relationship and love story, was just Penelope's kind of key moment, I think, was as the wallflower for multiple seasons, when the queen discovers who she is and like outs her in front of society, and she literally walks into the center of that circle, the center stage, center of the room. And I thought that was incredibly symbolic of the journey that Penelope had been on, and she handles it very well, and she completely owns everything, and she's purely herself as well in her speech. And it's like her finding her real voice in the end. Obviously she still wants to keep the column and she still wants to write, but she's becoming herself rather than the character of Lady Whistledown. She's now like, this is me, this is who I am, I'm kind of here warts and all. And what I think is interesting is you can tell that the room kind of respects her for that. I think there was part of me that was like, is she not going to get loads of backlash because she's written so many things about so many different people? And maybe that will come, perhaps that will be a thing next season, I don't know. But I think for the most part, the way she kind of presents it and owns it, I think people are more just like respecting it in a way of like the honesty and her just being herself, and maybe respecting the talent as well, the talent of not just the writing, but the fact that she was able to keep it a secret for so long. That was kind of the key development moment of Penelope, was center stage, finding her voice, finding her true identity, still holding on to her power. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment. So moving on to their actual relationship then. So I think a really poignant place to start is obviously Penelope's not talking to Colin, and you can kind of tell that Colin's a bit confused. He misses her. He got very used to getting like the letters from her. He sort of doesn't really know what's going on, but obviously from Penelope's point of view, what he said about her was really hurtful, about how, you know, he'd never caught her and it would be so ridiculous, and, you know, quite an over-the-top response that was obviously quite hurtful for her to hear, and he doesn't know that. And I think they have this confrontation outside that's quite a bit of a turning point, at least in them becoming friends again, which is when she says, you miss me but not enough to court me, or something along those lines. And his face is a little bit like, you know, he's confused himself and he's not really sure, because basically what she very bravely is pointing out is, you know, I mean so much to you, you're saying you miss me, etc. But then the idea of like being with me is just so like crazy. And she's right, that like doesn't really add up. Obviously you can really miss somebody and just have a friendship with somebody, but you still don't have to then be like mean about the person. He didn't know she could hear, obviously, but still he could have stood up for her more, which obviously we see later on that he does stand up for her. So that's the turning point. And then I've already spoken about how then he helps her and decides to teach her charm, and it's quite sweet, it's quite funny. But then we have the first kiss. So this is another obviously big turning point, is that she thinks all her prospects are completely gone, she's ruined everything, and she's never been kissed before. That's one of my favourite films, actually, Never Been Kissed. You know, she looks at her dear friend and is like, can you please do this one thing for me? She sees it as her one opportunity. Obviously there's probably a part of her, you know, she's always loved Colin, she fancies Colin, that is like, I'm just going to try my luck. Everything is awful, so why not just try and kiss the man that I really like. You know, it's a very vulnerable moment. Like, she's really putting herself. A lot of people online called it desperate, and like, yeah, but people use that word in such a mean way. Like, in that moment, she was desperate. She was desperate in that sense of like, everything had gone, like all her hopes were dashed, and she's desperate just to feel something, and she's desperate just to have that one experience. Like, she might never have it again. So yeah, she was being desperate, but not in that way of like, people use that word in such like a, oh, she's so desperate, or he's so desperate. Yeah, I think it was deeper than that and more emotional than that. But obviously the kiss changes absolutely everything, because sparks are flying and Colin is feeling all kinds of things and starts like fantasizing about it and wants to relive it. And I'm sure Penelope also, you know, definitely enjoyed the kiss because she's always wanted to kiss Colin. So it is this massive moment, and things are a bit awkward between them afterwards. They're kind of a bit giggly, a bit shy with each other, a bit sort of like, so should we just forget that happened and just be friends? But Colin's definitely like keen on her now, whereas Penelope's kind of going the other way. Like, she obviously still loves Colin, but she's almost in practical mode of like, I'm out here trying to find a match, I need to focus, let's just forget that happened. Because she also starts to bond with Lord Debling, is that his name? So another question is, another discourse is she better suited to Lord Debling versus Colin? Now, in my opinion, actually at the start, I think that they had a good connection, her and the Lord. And what I really liked about them is that Penelope finally was being herself. She was just still at the wall, kind of moaning about people, I think, or being a little bit bitchy. And then she's like horrified when she realizes that she's talking to a lord. But he actually, again, really respects that. And that's charm. Charm is being yourself, and being yourself in the purest form, and, you know, finding somebody that is on your similar wavelength. And that definitely happened. So I actually did quite like them at first. It's not like I wanted her to end up with him, but I really loved that he allowed Penelope to be herself. And obviously Colin did knock her confidence, so this was good for her confidence to have somebody show an interest in her. And, you know, I was really happy for her, basically, that had happened. Is he a better match? No, because it wasn't a love match, and he was going to be really far away for like years, I think, so, you know, something like crazy like that. She would have got the independence that she wanted, though. It's the whole head over heart. I think actually logically it made loads of sense. They got on well, they would have cared for each other. He's definitely seemed to respect her, he would have treated her well. He's also away. It would have been a bit of a lonely life, I guess, but she wanted freedom and independence, which she would have got. But obviously Colin wanted more for her. Selfishly, he also just started to like her and have feelings for her and fall for her. But he also really, with the realization of what he felt with her, really wanted better for her, and did not think that was obviously a good match. So he, you know, sabotages it by, you know, kind of getting involved. And the Lord Debling character obviously sees that, he's not stupid, and backs down. I'm kind of surprised we didn't see him for the rest of the season, though. I thought maybe him and Cressida would, again, you can tell I've not read the book, I thought maybe he would still be about, but I guess that plot point ended, and then yeah, he left, and in part 2 he was nowhere to be seen or even mentioned, I don't think. So another question is friendship a good base for a relationship? Now it's different for everybody, and this conversation comes up a lot in the show, but I definitely say yes. Like, I think being with a partner who is also your good friend or your best friend, I don't think they have to be your best friend. I think people have these really high standards of like, your partner should be your best friend. It's like, you're allowed to have your partner and a best friend. Like, not everything has to be so black and white. That's just my perspective, and I try and support my clients with that kind of black and white mentality, especially the clients that suffer with relationship anxiety and relationship OCD. I work with a lot of people who are struggling with doubts with their relationship and the high expectations and things like that around, like, no, they should be my best friend. And it's like, well, if you've got a best friend already, that's absolutely fine, as long as there's that connection, and friendship is that. But I think as a good base, absolutely. I think it's like the slow burn approach. It's that when you're friends, not, you know, sparks aren't necessarily flying straight away because you're just mates. I know for Penelope they were, but it can build, that attraction can build. I'm definitely a believer in things growing over time. I definitely believe that you can grow in love. I definitely believe you can grow in attraction. I definitely believe you can grow in connection. Not to say with any pairing, like there has to be some kind of fundamentals in place at first. With Colin and Penelope, the fundamentals being their friendship and the fact that Penelope really saw Colin for who he is and loved him instantly, and that was a good foundation. And then they obviously formed a friendship and had a lot in common and had similar wit and similar interests and could hold a conversation as well that wasn't dry and stuff like that. So they were really good foundations there, and obviously with that it builds, but I don't think it's essential. I don't think you need to be friends first. Again, it's all subjective really, but I do think it's a lovely way to build a relationship, is kind of working on the friendship side of it. And all that really means is the stuff you have in common, the stuff that you like to do together, having a laugh together, shared interests and shared support. Obviously friendship is about support and being there for someone, and of course, you know, you want that in a partner as well. I did see some people again criticize Colin and Penelope. This was more when part 1 had aired, around it's an unbalanced match, because Penelope obviously loved Colin from the beginning, and almost this sense of like Colin doesn't really deserve her because he's not seen her in that way since the start and is kind of playing catch up now, and maybe it's like all on his terms a little bit and she's just had to wait for years. And I get it. I think it's a bit harsh. I do understand it though. It's not the same as like when two people meet and it's like instant connection, and or like the last season was very like enemies to lovers, which people love. I'm not sure people love the trope of like, or as much, they don't love it as much as like unrequited love and then the person finally seeing them. I think especially when it's female unrequited love towards a man, I think maybe again people sort of see it as a bit sad really, or a bit desperate was a word that I mentioned before. All these shoulds, like Colin should have seen her before, or how can Colin suddenly be attracted to her, and all this type of thing. This is what happens when you go on X or Twitter or whatever. You see all these comments like that. I definitely have been reflecting on why people aren't the biggest fan of this pairing, and I think that's one of the reasons is perhaps they see it as just an unbalanced match and they're not quite convinced of Colin's love or attraction back. I've already spoken about just the beauty standards and people comparing them to previous couples in the show. But yeah, let me know how you feel about this pairing obviously, but if you've seen similar discourse to me around it just not being as popular this time around. Certainly when part 1 aired, not so much with part 2. I think it's getting quite a good response actually, and I mean the pairing, not so much the whole show. Part 1, seeing as we're there, it ends with the carriage scene, so I definitely want to talk about the carriage scene. And I loved the scene mainly because it was so Bridgerton, of like him bursting in and declaring, he had his I burn for you moment basically. You're the object of all my desires, you know, those moments that we've seen in the show for a few seasons now. And he had his moment with being like, I do have feelings for you, and you know, I look forward to going to sleep so I can see you. And it was all very over the top and fantastic television. Genuinely, all jokes aside, I loved it, mainly because it was hot and steamy, and then they just like burst out laughing afterwards. And there was something, it really reminded me of their friendship. There was something so warm about the fact that they were like, oh God, have people heard us? Have people seen us? I just loved the way that they like looked at each other and like got the giggles. And it was very like two friends. They looked quite young, but in like a nice way, and just proper falling in love basically, and finding the whole thing quite funny. And like, I can't believe we just did that. They didn't say any of this, but it was all kind of in that moment. And of course he then proposes, and that's how part 1 ends. Okay, moving on to Colin and Penelope in part 2 of the season. So a few standout moments that I want to talk about, because obviously I can't talk about every single scene that they have and every single moment, but something that really came across to me, and Colin, you know, explicitly says to his brothers, I believe, and it's just really quite validating, especially to the people that kind of question Colin at home watching, is that he says like he thinks that he actually did have feelings for Penelope the entire time. It's just he didn't realise, which I thought was really nice, especially the way he phrased it, and almost that admitting to himself actually that I think there's always been care there, there's always been feelings there, and feelings can fluctuate in terms of their intensity, but maybe there was something always simmering basically, and he always cared for her and felt for her in some way. And then obviously post kiss it ramped up, and now he can really see it clearly that he probably had feelings for her for quite a while. So I thought that was really nice. I thought that was really validating for Penelope as well, really validating for the viewers who, you know, did have those concerns around his feelings being quite sudden. Another key moment I thought was when he stands up to Penelope's mother. I thought that was like, oh, he is, you know, in husband mode before they've even got married. Obviously, it's quite like ballsy, really, to kind of stand up to your partner's family. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that, you know, it puts the person usually in quite a difficult position in terms of their like loyalty to their partner or their family and kind of not wanting there to be any conflict. But I think in this situation it worked really well because she was bad-mouthing him and bad-mouthing the family and essentially telling Penelope off for her engagement and stuff like that. And, you know, and Colin overhears and puts her in her place, basically. And she kind of deserves it, to be honest. And it really changes everything. Kind of from then onwards, the relationship between mother and daughter is so different, and she encourages the sisters to be nicer to her, and, you know, she really changes. And, you know, it's not all on Colin, but I do think that was a massive turning point of him really laying down the law and saying, you know, have some respect for not only me, but for your own child and our decision and their love and their like partnership. So that was definitely a really significant moment, I think, and really powerful for Penelope as well, because obviously, as I spoke about previously, people don't stand up for her like often, and it kind of is the opposite of what Colin did before around, you know, everyone's kind of lightly teasing him and kind of making fun of Penelope by being like, oh, you're not courting her, are you? You know, that I feel like the implication is there with what that means. And Colin never stood up for her before. And now it's like he realises the importance of that. And of course she expresses that. She says, you have no idea how much that means to me to hear you stand up for me. No one's ever stood up for me. And then of course that's when he says that he loves her. And then we have the love scene. So there's a lot to say about the love scene. It's kind of going a bit viral because, you know, they broke the bed. They, as in the actress and actor, were like proper going at it basically and like giving it their all and kind of breaking the set. So yeah, there's a lot, if you look online, there's a lot of kind of stories around this scene, but I thought it was really great. I thought it was very touching. We obviously have a lot of love scenes in Bridgerton. What I love, which is consistent in the show, is conversations around consent. And obviously Colin does ask Penelope if she wants to stop and if she's okay and if it's okay for him to keep going. And of course she does consent for him to keep going. And I think that's really important for people to see, particularly as I do imagine quite a lot of young people watch Bridgerton. So that message around consent is really important, and communication in general. So obviously as a therapist, I work with people in relationships all the time, and when it comes to sex, there's a lot of like, oh, I need to talk to him about this, or I need to talk to her about that, and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and it's hard to have conversations. But what I really loved about this scene as well is the communication, the fact that like she was a virgin, he was more experienced, and they kind of spoke about that as it was happening. And she was like, I want you to tell me what to do. Like she really wanted that, and he did. I think at first he sort of says that he doesn't, you know, need to do that or something, but then he was like, oh, okay, she actually does really want me to tell her what to do and kind of show her the ropes, so to speak. So I really liked that though. I felt like it was really realistic in that sense of like the like conversations that can happen, rather than all the kind of just what you see in movies sometimes is just the kind of throwing off clothes and passion and kisses and kind of falling onto the bed and there's no talk at all. But often there is communication in sexual relationships. So I thought that was really good to see as well. I love that he really validated her looks. You know, he spoke about her hair, her body, and, you know, I thought that was really great. I thought Colin was also like really considerate as well in terms of warning her about pain and being really mindful of that as well, not just kind of thinking of his own needs, like really being considerate of her and her feelings and her needs and everything else. So I thought that was also brilliant. And again, kind of a staple of their relationship, they were like laughing afterwards as well and kind of got the giggles. And to me, laughter is such a symbol of not just love, but like friendship as well. And so I really love the fact that they had so many moments throughout the show where they would just burst out laughing, almost like the absurdity of it all, of like, look at us, look what we're doing. Like, me and you have been friends for years and now we're being intimate. I thought, again, really realistic, really kind of moving in so many different ways. So yeah, I love those little elements of their friendship kind of evolving into love, but maintaining aspects that they would have had before, rather than this like brand new relationship. So yeah, that scene obviously I had to talk about, which I thought it was like beautifully done, and I thought they both looked great, and yeah, it was just a great love scene. Something that I was waiting to happen, I was a bit like, I can't remember what episode it was, maybe episode 6 or 5, can't remember, but I was like, why hasn't she said that she's always loved him? It kind of dawned on me, like, we know as the viewer that she's loved him for years, since the beginning, but Colin doesn't know that. And in the carriage scene, she said, like, I so want to be more than friends and stuff like that, but she didn't explicitly say, not that she has to, but I was just kind of waiting for that to happen, and it was really worth the wait, because then she does tell him in the church, and then they have their little dance, and again they're laughing and being silly together. And once again, a bit of a broken record here, but I just think that dynamic was very different to Kate and Anthony. Like, if we're going to compare Kate and Anthony, the enemies to lovers, it's all passion, it's all kind of fire, because it's like, we hate each other, we don't really, that kind of thing. And that's great and really entertaining. With Colin and Penelope, this is its own kind of passion, which is like more warm and more like soft in a way. And again, really putting focus on their friendship and the fact that they love to be silly together and have a laugh together and have the same sense of humour. I think humour, we've spoken a lot about friendship being a good base for a relationship, but obviously having sense of humour in common can be really important as well. And we really see that with them. So I personally found that really moving, that they would have these moments and just burst out laughing. And again, the kind of dancing one was another one. But then of course, before the wedding, it all is a disaster, because Colin finds out, and we're kind of waiting for this to happen, Colin finds out that Penelope is Lady Whistledown. And oh God, I thought he was going to be angry, which he was, but he like looked really heartbroken as well, and he had tears in his eyes, and I was like, oh God, this is awful. So yeah, it was actually quite sad. I was kind of shocked and like, oh my God, but it was actually quite emotional as well when he finds out, and he obviously feels very betrayed. He obviously hates the fact that she said a load of stuff about him, about his family, and it's a lie, isn't it? It's not nice for your partner to be lying to you or keeping a massive secret from you. So yeah, I actually think he kind of held it together quite well, considering, like, he had a strong reaction obviously and didn't really want anything to do with her, just kind of wanted to get through the wedding, because I think that was the next day. Held it together in terms of like, didn't completely go mad at her. Like, he had his moment of rage and then was like, I need to be separate from you. So yeah, I obviously felt for Colin, even though I knew it was going to happen and I understood why Penelope wasn't saying anything. It's just, you know, it must have been really hard for him to find out. So yeah, they have that incident, and which is obviously very dramatic. They have the wedding literally the next day. So this is where we go into like TV territory rather than real life, where you have like this shocking reveal the night before your wedding, which obviously doesn't really happen in real life normally anyway. So yeah, they have to like get through the wedding. And you know, I think what softens Colin is that she looks stunning and she's walking down the aisle, and he does obviously really love her, and he's trying to like reconcile with it and wants to forgive her, but is struggling to, and is like worried about her at the same time, but obviously worried for himself and protective of his family. There's so much going on at the same time in Colin's head, you can really tell. And Penelope's just like riddled with guilt, obviously, and wants Colin to forgive her and all of that. So the wedding is beautiful, but obviously quite tense. And then they have I think it was the brunch or the like wedding breakfast. They do, again, well, they're not spending any time together, but then when they finally do come together, the walls are coming down, it's softer, and they do have a dance together. And that really reminded me of Pride and Prejudice, because there's a moment where the room is completely cleared and it's just the two of them dancing, like they're the only two people literally in the room, when obviously there actually is people there. And, you know, I thought it was really romantic, even though it was exactly like the scene from Pride and Prejudice. But, you know, who cares? It's a great scene. So, yeah, I thought that was their way of like coming together again, basically, without... They spoke, obviously, but sometimes words aren't the most important thing. Sometimes you just need to like shift something in a particular direction by doing something. And I think they rekindled some intimacy by dancing together. Obviously, when she says that she's not going to give up Whistledown, which I've already kind of spoken about her reasons for that and her not wanting to give it up, he retreats again. He, you know, can't get his head round why she wouldn't do that. And it's hard, you can really see both sides. I can see why she, you know, it's important to her and she doesn't want to do it, but I can absolutely see why Colin's like, no, you are going to give it up, right? Like, because it's had this massive impact on society and you've spoken about things and said mean things. There is also an element of like, you don't need to do it because you're with me now. And I think that's an interesting, in terms of like the male perspective, especially historically, the men had the power. The men took care of their wives, took care of their children, not literally as in hands-on, but provided for them and took care of everything financially and were the head of the household. So I think Colin's definitely threatened by the fact that Penelope, with the fact that she got money from it, she's very talented, he wants to be a writer. He is threatened by this massive reveal. Again, he was seeing Penelope more than he did before, but he still wasn't quite seeing her, because to see her would be to see her in all her talent and her skill and her power, and the fact that she doesn't actually need Colin. She wants Colin and she needs him like emotionally and as a partner, but doesn't like need him in that way of like, you know, I'm all for you, I just exist to be your wife. So that throws Colin off, obviously, and that's definitely part of why he is mad at her and doesn't know how to be with her. And that you can see this tug of war that he has. He's like still very much sexually attracted to her, and there's moments where he like wants to give in to that, and then there's moments where he's like, no, I can't. And, you know, it's all very Bridgerton and we love it. Finally, though, he does, you know, obviously a lot of drama happens that I won't talk through. There's a lot of like the big reveals and all of that, and the kind of Cressida drama and, you know, stuff that happens. I am going to talk about the other characters in a bit, but when it comes to Colin and Penelope, basically what happens is he admits that he is envious of her, and they really meet in the middle, which again is such like a good relationship like representation to see, of like, she obviously admits fault, she takes responsibility, she knows the kind of burden of being like Lady Whistledown and fully admits that and understands that. And Colin also admits that he just felt quite embarrassed because she obviously had seen his writing and felt quite envious of her and didn't know his place in the relationship anymore. So they have quite an honest conversation, and obviously they reconcile and tell each other that they love each other. And it was a really good kind of coming together in that really honest way. And I felt like they both make each other feel really seen, and they both genuinely see each other now. I think that was the main ending of that storyline between the two of them, was he now finally does see her 100%. It improved as the season went on, but then by the end he 100% sees her as Lady Whistledown. He even says, that is who you are. I see that now. She obviously really, you know, values the fact that he makes her feel seen when she hasn't previously felt seen before, and he also feels seen by her. You know, he said that to her as well, that he never, probably again, third child syndrome and being lonely on his travels, and she with her letters and their interactions over the years really made him feel seen as well. So they kind of both have done the same thing for each other. So their love story makes so much sense to me, actually. So yeah, I thought all of that was really well written and quite beautiful. And yeah, now he's just a big champion for his woman, which is what we love to see. And yeah, at the end, obviously they have their baby, but he also says that she supported him to write his novel, and you know, she still has the Colin. So yeah, it's all happily ever after. So that's Colin and Penelope. Obviously, as I said, please let me know your thoughts about their relationship and as them as individuals. But I do want to spend the rest of the video just touching on a few other subjects. So starting off with Eloise then, and Eloise and Penelope's friendship. So the first thing that I kind of wrote down was friendship breakups are awful. So I literally wrote that down because through like personal experience and with clients, the emotional turmoil of losing like a best friend can definitely sometimes be worse than breaking up with a partner. I think we're more mentally prepared somewhat with romantic breakups. We see a lot of them on TV. There's like the books that you read and the songs you listen to, like your friends will come and support you if you've gone through a romantic breakup, and your family does, and it's just more of a thing. Friendship breakups is not even like a term that people use all the time. That was the first thing that I kind of reflected on, was like, actually these two girls are probably really suffering, because, well, especially Penelope, because she was kind of left alone, but also like Eloise as well. Like, it's not easy to suddenly lose a friend and feel so betrayed by that friend as well on multiple levels. Like, I think Eloise feels betrayed in the obvious sense, but also being lied to and humiliated by the whole thing, and her best friend wrote some horrible things about her and her family, and there's layers to the hurt there and the pain, you know, perhaps a bit of envy as well. Actually, I thought that was really sad, obviously, that they're not friends and they're not speaking. You can both feel them looking at each other and that grief, in a sense, of each other. So that was the first thing that I wrote down. Another question that I wanted to reflect on was, why does Eloise become friends with Cressida? Now, I did write this down before. She kind of admits to Penelope that it was like her being slightly petty, but that also she actually got something out of it. And I think that happens with breakups, friendship and romantic, is you start to look at the opposite of who's caused you pain. Now, as I said before, I would argue that Cressida and Penelope actually have quite a lot in common, but they are different personalities, obviously, and different interests and stuff like that. It doesn't surprise me at all that there was that kind of pettiness, but also, you know, Eloise probably wanted to just change her lens in a way, like look for something different. She'd been best friends with Penelope for so long, and she wanted something different and something new and something fresh, and probably found her quite amusing and all the rest of it. So I completely believe that there was actually an enjoyment there, as well as the part of her that was kind of getting like revenge a little bit, I'm sure. Something else that I wanted to say about Eloise then is, and it's one of my favourite parts of the show actually, is that she's got, you know, very minimal interest, or so she says, about romance and marriage, and she wants to kind of live her adventure, and she's quite like anti-love in a lot of ways, but her love for her siblings really shines through, her love for her family. Like, I love her relationship with Colin, I love her relationship with Benedict, and you can tell that not only does she look up to them, but they really like respect her and find her company really fun and engaging. So that was just a part of the show that I really wanted to comment on, is that sibling love is definitely a valid form of love, and actually Eloise's heart is more open than she probably realises. She's probably more sensitive, her heart is probably more full and open than she knows, which puts her in the danger zone, to be honest, around like getting her heart broken and things like that. But it's obviously a really lovely quality as well. She's not completely closed off. I think in her head she wants to be, because she's like, it's just not for me, and society's not for her, and she's not out there looking for marriage or anything, but her heart, you know, is a bit different. We saw her getting emotional at the wedding. I think that's another great example. Like, she has more of a relationship with love than she realises, essentially. And of course I have to comment on the kind of reconciliation between her and Penelope, and I kind of loved that it happened naturally. There was part of me that was kind of like, oh, what was the turning point? I feel like I kind of missed the turning point. But I think actually what it was, their common ground, because sometimes that's all it takes, is to find common ground with somebody that you've fallen out with. And their common ground was their love for Colin. And I think once Eloise was prioritising Colin's well-being rather than, I need to tell the truth, I need to out Penelope, that's when she softened a bit, and then they were able to talk things through and I guess bond again. So it was really nice to see the season end with them being friends again. So I want to talk about Francesca's storyline as well. So I absolutely loved the storyline. I didn't expect it. I went into the season, I didn't really know what was going to happen. I thought it was obviously all going to be about Colin and Penelope, and I kind of forgot, to be honest, that they do have subplots as well. now, like in my mind, maybe because I've just like, I'll admit with seasons 1 and 2, I've rewatched just like these scenes between the main couple. Like I've rewatched all of like the Daphne and Duke scenes. I've rewatched all the Kate and Anthony scenes. So that's probably made me think that like that's the main plot, and it is the main plot, but like that's the main thing that happens. But there's actually like loads else that goes on, and this was such a good example of that, where Francesca had this like whole massive storyline which I really loved. As a therapist that I mentioned before, works with a lot of people who suffer with relationship OCD and relationship anxiety, I think it's really good to see different types of falling in love. People who suffer with this get very triggered by what we see in shows like Bridgerton, where it's like so over the top, so passionate. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in real life at all, but to be constantly fed like from Disney movies at a young age to like movies in the 90s like Titanic, you've got like The Notebook, and then shows like Bridgerton, it's a lot of information about like what love should look like and what relationships should look like. And that conversation was even had in the show itself, where the mum talks about how like, you know, she's kind of saying to Francesca about types of love and passion, and Francesca's kind of like always having this uphill battle with her mum, being like, this is my choice, this is what I want, and I do love him, and we're just different, and it's slow and it's quiet, and it's like they're both so introverted, and they bond over that. And I actually think sparks fly more than they even think. Like when they're just stood like not saying anything to each other, you felt something between them. When they're just sat on the sofa like not talking, yes, it might be a bit strange to some, but you could feel something between them, and that in itself is valid. Now, I had to Google this because I haven't read the book, but obviously his cousin coming into it at the end, I was like, wait, what just happened there? I'm so confused. Apparently, in the book, Francesca's real love interest is a character called Michael, and this is Michaela that's coming in. So they've gender swapped the main love interest. So that's really interesting. Now, the gender swap, I don't care at all about. In fact, I think that's really cool. Like, I don't have really any thoughts about that. I'm sure other people do. That part is fine. For me, I was just a little bit disappointed because I was worried it's going to invalidate the love story that we saw play out. The showrunner has come out and said that it doesn't, and that she does, it's a genuine love story, and this is going to be a genuine love story, and they're both just different. And she literally says it doesn't invalidate it. But I don't know, there's obviously that part of me that's a bit like, oh, what a shame, like, because it was nice to see the slow burn, just a different type of falling in love. The fact that it's not necessarily like super dramatic. Often it's very mundane, actually. You just meet someone, you really like them, they really like you love spending time together, and it kind of goes from there, rather than this like chaos and drama and all of that. So a little bit disappointing. That's my bad for not knowing the books, I guess. But I mean, I'm excited to see how it plays out, and obviously like queer representation is really important. So yeah, I'm sure it'll be great. Speaking of queer representation, I'm going to touch on everyone's favourite Bridgerton, which is Benedict. That didn't surprise me one bit, just in terms of his character just seems very like fluid to me. Obviously, I don't know it. Who am I to assume someone's identity just through the screen? Like, I have no idea, but he just seemed like very open-minded, I think is the word that I'm looking for. And I thought it was amazing to see that play out, that his open-mindedness got tapped into by someone else. Like, someone else brought that out of him, and now he's exploring his identity and having like relationships with different genders. And so yeah, really excited to see where that goes, because I think that's really good representation as well. I just want to quickly touch on Cressida as well, and say that I found it a little bit sad what happened to her character, because I felt like in a way she became quite redeemable. I actually felt quite sorry for her. Her mum isn't somebody who stands up for women, not like a girl's girl, to be honest, and like clearly raised her to be competitive with other women. And I understand why, because of the kind of market of like, we're here to try and find you a match, so these are all your competitors. But that obviously informed a lot of Cressida's views of people, kind of sabotaged her friendship with Eloise, never really gave Penelope the time of day, was actually actively quite mean to Penelope. I think seeing her family more in the show really put into perspective why Cressida is how she is. But I quite enjoyed her, especially in part 1, kind of was rooting for her in lots of ways, and they sort of made her the enemy again. And it was a shame really that she kind of lost, in a sense. Not that I wanted her to kind of win fully and kind of take everyone down, but you know, her getting taken away was quite sad to see. So I don't know if she'll be in the next season, but yeah, let me know your thoughts about what happened with Cressida. And then finally, then I just want to end by talking about Kate and Anthony, just because they're so popular, and you know, that was a really beautiful part of the season. What I loved about that was you're seeing a relationship after the happily ever after, which we never get to see really. We never really get to see that, more so in TV than in films obviously, but I love that we saw them coming back on their honeymoon and wanting to extend their honeymoon, and them announcing their baby, and them giving advice to other couples, especially Kate. Kate was fantastic in that kind of motherly big sister role. I loved the bit when she was like, marriage can be tough, and Anthony was like, I don't think our marriage is tough, and you know, quite defensive of their union and stuff like that. And she's like, come on, for God's sake. Because she's right, like relationships are quite difficult, but they're obviously wonderful at the same time. But I love that they had like a different approach to that chat with Colin. So yeah, it was lovely to see their relationship. It was lovely to see him say, let's go to India, let's learn more about, you know, I loved what he said about, I want to be able to teach our child about your culture. Like he wants to be a part of that, not all on Kate, about obviously where she's from and the culture and everything in India. So that was really moving, and you know, I think everybody agreed with Kate when she said, like, don't make me love you even more. I think everybody was thinking the same thing, to be honest. So yeah, I thought that would be a nice place to end, is talking about them. I know there was other storylines as well with like Lady Bridgerton and, you know, like other characters as well, but I feel like that I've already spoken way too much. So yeah, overall really enjoyed this season. Had some unanswered questions around like, you know, why certain characters did certain things that I've already touched upon. I do think it all kind of got tied up nicely at the end though, even when I did get a bit lost. Overall, even I was a bit unsure about Colin and Penelope because we've already seen them before and there wasn't that kind of freshness, but I ended up really enjoying their relationship, really enjoying their dynamic, loved all of their scenes, to be honest. I thought their love story was really beautiful. Obviously the Francesca storyline, really enjoyed as well. Not sure about where it's going to go, but yeah, loved it, thought it was really great. Please let me know down below what you thought of this season, and let me know any thoughts, not just of the season, but of certain character storylines and what you think is going to happen next time. I guess no spoilers for people that haven't read like the books, but yeah, anyway, thank you so much if you've got to this point for watching the whole thing. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and if you're a fan of Bridgerton, please subscribe to my channel because I do film reaction videos to TV as well, and I do these breakdowns of different TV shows, which I really enjoy because I love talking about TV, to be honest. It's one of my favourite things. Please follow me on Instagram as well. Hopefully I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much again for watching, and take care. Bye.